Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. In today's video, I'm going to be reading these arcs that were sent to me for review. Okay, so here's the deal. It's almost the end of February and I am a bit behind on my reading because it's a short month, it's been a busy month, and I really want to read these 3 books by the end of the month. So I thought, why don't we do a reading vlog? It's the afternoon of Friday, February 25th, so I have like 3.5 days to do this. I've started one of them, but I'm not that far in yet, and I think this might be doable. It's gonna be a little bit of a stretch, but we're gonna see if we can make it happen. So let me show you the 3 books that I am planning to read for the purposes of this video. The first one is The Resting Place by Camilla Sten. This goes on sale in March, and it's an adult thriller about a woman who witnessed her grandmother's murder or like saw her killer, but she has face blindness, and then she ends up at a creepy estate. I feel like it's gonna be interesting. I'm not super far in yet. I've only read 30 pages, but I feel like once I dive into it, it's gonna be a pretty quick read. This book was originally published in Swedish and has now been translated into English, so the English version is coming out in March. And so far it's interesting. Last year I read The Lost Village from this author and I really liked it. I liked her ability to do great atmosphere, so I'm hopeful that this will be a good read. So far what we know is that our main character arrived at her grandmother's apartment as the murderer was coming out. So she saw the murderer, but has face blindness and so couldn't recognize who they are. And then in her grandmother's will, she was left this kind of mysterious old mansion that she didn't know much about. And so she's now going to visit that mansion with her partner or spouse or something. And then we did also get a brief flashback chapter that seems to be her grandmother's perspective when she was young. I think that's what it is. So like set in 1965. So I think we're gonna probably get that periodically. So we're gonna have these 2 interweaving timelines, mostly focused on the present, but sometimes giving us some insight into the past. So I'm excited for this. This is the one that I'm gonna read first, but I am also planning to read Goliath by Tochi Onyebuchi. I'm really excited about this. It came out in January and a finished copy was sent to me for review from Tor, so thank you to them. I read Riot Baby by this author and loved it, and I feel like this is gonna be good. It's like a hard-hitting literary sci-fi novel. It is sort of what I'm hearing. It sounds like it would be right up my alley. It's set in the 2050s where Earth has begun to empty and those with the means and privilege have departed the great cities of the United States for the more comfortable confines of space colonies, and those left behind salvage what they can from the collapsing infrastructure and eke out an existence as their neighborhoods are being cannibalized. It says it's a primal biblical epic flung into the future, weaving together disparate narratives of a space dweller looking at New Haven, Connecticut as a chance to reconnect with his spiraling lover, a group of laborers attempting to renew the promises of Earth's crumbling cities, a journalist attempting to capture the violence of the streets, a marshal trying to solve a kidnapping, into a richly urgent mosaic about race, class, gentrification, and who is allowed to be the hero of any history. It sounds phenomenal. I feel like I'm going to love this. I'll be reading that for the video. And then lastly, a debut novel that is coming out in March that was also sent to me for review by Tor. This is The Bone Orchard by Sarah Mueller. I love this cover and I'm very excited about this. I hope it's good. It's one of these things where it's a very high concept premise, and if it's done well, it could be amazing, but like whether a debut author can pull it off or not, I guess we'll see. It's kind of a genre bending book, which I tend to like. It says, "Welcome to Orchard House, where the wealthy and influential men of Beauregard come to dine, drink, play cards, and talk politics. It's where they come to visit with Mistress Charm and those birthed from the fruit of an orchard of bone trees, grown in vats, made to serve her and the needs of her guests. But Mistress Charm herself is bound, a mind lock implanted in her skull to harness her power and ensure her obedience. Now, the very emperor who destroyed her people and bound her to his will promises her freedom if she can solve a murder. His own. Lying on his deathbed, he gives her one last command: discover which of his sons betrayed him and plotted his death." So it sounds really, really good. It's like a sci-fi fantasy horror murder mystery mashup. Those are the 3 books that I'm going to be reading for the purposes of this video. I am going to dive further into The Resting Place and I will check back in once I have something to update you with. Okay, I'm gonna do an update. I am flying through this book. I am about 1/3 of the way through now. Oh my gosh, it's so creepy. Like, it's so creepy. I really love it though, like that she just does an amazing job of writing this kind of atmosphere and these like tense moments. It's like a thriller horror kind of thing because it's almost got like this gothic haunted feel to the house where it's like haunted by history and maybe by an actual person. Not like ghost story so much, but like it's so good. Also, I'm realizing it's not entirely clear. I don't think that the flashbacks, which end up being from like journal entries, from a journal they find in this kind of creepy little servant's room in without windows and stuff in the house, and it's from a girl who is a maid. She's Polish and had come to Sweden as like a domestic servant, maybe working for her cousin, and it seems like possibly the cousin was the grandmother and like but it was secret that they were cousins. I don't know, like it's super weird and creepy and like the main character has a history of mental health things and like hallucinations, so she's not totally a reliable narrator, so you don't know like how much of what she thinks she's seeing is legit and how much of it is just all in her head. Like it's really it's really good. It's really good. So I'm very into this, flying through it. I'll try to check back in once I'm like, you know, maybe another third of the way through or so. But so far, it's great. The atmosphere is top notch. Hello, I finished The Resting Place. I kind of breezed right through that. It was definitely a page turner and a book that I enjoyed with a caveat. I don't love the ending. The twist at the end feels a little cheap to me, I'll be honest. And, you know, like that doesn't totally take away from this. I still would say I love reading her writing, the way that she does atmosphere and like growing paranoia works really well for me. I kind of love it. And I think she's got interesting, messy characters, which I also like. However, I think she has a tendency to do these sort of like cheat endings. And I will say this, with The Lost Village, it didn't really bother me. Although after I read it, I saw some other reviews of people who were upset by the ending and felt like it was kind of a cheat. And I can see what they're saying. In that case, it still worked for me and it didn't at all detract from the experience. In this case, it kind of bugged me, especially because I just think there were some much more interesting ways she could have gone with the ending, or with the ending that we get, there should have been more signposting that was what was going on earlier. I'm not going to be more specific than that because I don't want to spoil it for people who haven't read it, but like that kind of knocks it down for me a little bit. That said, will I probably pick up whatever else this author writes? Yeah, I probably will, just because even if she doesn't write the best endings or endings that I love, I have such a good time reading her books. I like fly through them. They're very escapist. They're very atmospheric. They're very creepy. And the way she writes tension and atmosphere is like top notch. So yeah, not like a home run. I will probably give this like a 3.5 stars and round it up on Goodreads because it's a book for review. But I had a really good time reading it. So I think people are really different on endings. There are some readers where an ending they don't like will completely ruin a book for them. I'm not usually that way. Like on occasion that can happen, but usually a mediocre to not great ending doesn't ruin a book for me. And certainly in this case, it didn't. I still had a great time reading it. There's still a lot of things that I love about her writing and the way that she set things up. The setting was so good, like dark family secrets and pieces of the twist I did figure out as we were going. But the big sort of twist at the end, I'm like, okay, but like this feels a little cheap to me. I don't know, not my favorite. So yeah, 3.5 stars, but I flew through it. I finished all of the rest of this today, which is awesome. It's only about 6:30 p.m. and I started it this afternoon. I do have a live stream I'm on tonight for a read along I'm doing with Leanna at Leanna's Library, so I won't be doing a lot of reading tonight. But the next book I'm going to be reading is Goliath, partly because this one is already out, so it's more of a priority, and it's Black History Month by a Black author, so even more so. Let's get this in before the end of February. I'm really excited to read this. I think it's going to be obviously a very different book from The Resting Place, but I am anxious to see how it goes. I have heard that it's very literary. Angela from Literature Science Alliance read it and she said she thought it was amazing, but she thinks people who don't like a more literary style or a more slow, dense style aren't gonna love it. That can really work for me, so I feel like I'm gonna love this. I will check back in once I've made some progress on the next book. Hello, it is Sunday morning. I did not do an update yesterday. It was just kind of like a busy day and I didn't end up getting to read a whole lot of this because I had like a live stream and everything, but I have made some progress on Goliath and I wanted to touch base with you guys. So one thing about this book is I knew going in it was gonna be more on the literary side. It's very literary and it's very dense. The writing is well executed, but like you have to pay close attention and it takes time to get through and figure out what's going on. The other thing about this is it's told non-linearly, so there's multiple perspectives and the book is divided up into seasons. So what you get is part one is summer, and so it's all of these different things that have taken place across different summers with different characters in different places, and it's not linear. So like, like this is not something you can just sort of like slip right into. So here's the thing, I had read almost 50 pages of it and it was just taking me forever to get through it. So I decided to go ahead and purchase the audiobook because one thing that I found for my brain, at least, I know everybody's different, but for my brain, I have an easier time processing things and I'm able to process things more quickly when I have multiple inputs. So like if I'm listening and reading along at the same time, which is what I've decided to do for this book. And I do think it was a good decision because I finished part one. So I'm like, what, how far am I? Okay. So I'm like 80 pages in and getting from 50 pages to 80 pages was much easier and quicker than the first 50. So I am definitely feeling good about the choice to do a blended read with the audiobook and the physical book for this one, just because there's a lot happening, there's a lot to process, and I can totally see why this would be the kind of book that you would go back and reread. I know Angela said she reread it almost immediately because later in the book is when you suddenly put together like what this book is trying to do. So I'm like, okay, I can see why. So I'm trying to pay close attention so that I can kind of like put things together, but it is a little bit disjointed. It's interesting though. There's a lot of queer characters, a lot of Black characters, and it's set in this kind of dystopian future, right? Where like some people with money have escaped to space colonies and Earth is, a nuclear wasteland essentially. And there's multiple characters. So there's some people that are kind of like working class doing demolition on houses that are being overtaken by plants that need to be taken apart and bricks sent up to space. There's also these two men who end up falling for each other and they had met, you end up finding out they had met in the space colony. And now one of them is on Earth trying to get a house ready for his partner to come down, but there's like family stuff with that. And again, all of this is non-linear, right? So like you kind of piece it together a little bit at a time. You don't know who all of these people are. It's interesting because the two guys are named Jonathan and David, and I do wonder if it's intended to be a direct reference to the biblical Jonathan and David, who a lot of people think probably were queer in some way. I mean, I know some people like hate that as an idea, but like, I mean, it wouldn't be it wouldn't be shocking, but it's interesting that that's the names that he ended up choosing for them. Yeah, I don't know, like it's definitely bleak, beautiful writing, but dense writing, a lot of high-level vocabulary. I mean, Tochio Nibuchi has like multiple degrees from Ivy League universities, and like, man, is he putting all of that to use in this book. One other thing that's interesting about this is that a lot of the parts on Earth are set in New Haven, Connecticut, which is where Yale is, and so that's also interesting because he went to Yale for his bachelor's degree. Like when I saw that it was New Haven, I was like, did he go to Yale? So I went and looked, and yes, he did go to Yale. But it's interesting seeing it in this kind of like bleak future. Yeah, it's a really interesting book. I don't know entirely how to talk about this, but I will keep reading. I have finished part 1, which is summer, so next is fall, because like I said, it's divided up into seasons. And what I hear is that in the winter section, some things come together in an interesting way. So we'll see how it goes. I will check back in once I've made some progress on it. I'm hoping I can get through the rest of this book today. I don't have all day. I'm actually meeting up with Isabella from the Feminist Bookworm on Instagram, who's one of my friends and patrons, and she's in New York City for the week. And so we're meeting up for brunch and book shopping. So I'll take you guys along with me since I'm doing a vlog, so that'll be fun. I haven't like gone out to brunch with somebody in forever. We're both like vaccinated and all that. So plan is to finish Goliath today so that I can try to read the 3rd book tomorrow. And I think I have enough time that I could make that happen. So we'll see. Fingers crossed that I can actually like get through all 3 of these books before the month is over. Wish me luck. I will be back later. It is almost 8 o'clock at night and I am a little more than halfway through. I finished part 2 of the book, which is Fall, and yeah, continuing to think that blending the audiobook and the physical book is a very good choice. And it's very good. It's excellently written. I'm very curious to see how he's gonna pull everything together. One thing that I think is really interesting thematically about this, right, is that because Earth has like nuclear radiation and all of these things, and all of these wealthy people, mostly white people, have escaped into space, and a lot of people left have died off, Earth now feels more like a frontier. And it's interesting because the people who are centered as sort of frontiersmen are people of color. And there's some interesting ways that he kind of plays with those ideas. Like we have this vision of like white men as cowboys in the Wild West. And in this book, there's a part of it where these women of color find horses and convince the guys that they know to build a stable to keep the horses, and they like ride the horses, and it talks about them looking regal, and it's just kind of an interesting reversal of norms, and that even though there were actually black cowboys, it's not something that's often shown or talked about. And yeah, I don't know, he's doing a lot of really interesting things. There's a lot of interesting sci-fi pieces to it as well. And I'm very curious because from what I understand, the next part I'm about to read, part 3, is where things start to fall more into place and it makes more sense what the purpose of the story is. But regardless, I am enjoying it. I think it's really interesting and I'm looking forward to continuing. So I will check back in once I have finished part 3. Okay, so I finished Goliath and I kind of want to let my thoughts settle on this for a while before I talk about it, so I'll probably be back sometime tomorrow to give you my thoughts on it. It's very good. It's excellent and has a lot to think about. Anyway, I will be back once I've had some time to think about it, but I finished it. It is fantastic. It takes a turn. It's interesting. Yeah, okay. I will be back tomorrow. Okay, good morning. It is Monday. It is the last day of February, so we'll see if I can complete the task I've set for myself and actually finish all 3 books. I do want to talk about Goliath, which I finished last night. I mentioned that briefly. I think this book is such an excellent piece of literary science fiction. I think this is doing exactly what good science fiction that's not just like purely escapist should do, which is it is a powerful interrogation of the issues and fears of the day. This is dealing with climate change. It's dealing with fears of disease, of gentrification, of race wars, of class differences, of who gets access to space and like how is that a privileged thing. There are so many things woven into the text of this book. And I just think it does an incredible job of being both experimental, especially in style, because it is told non-linearly and it's told with this very elevated style of prose, which might be a little bit, challenging for some readers. You have to work for it, but I think it is so worth the effort, and it is ultimately still so relevant to the human experience. And specifically is focused a lot on the experiences of Black people in America, people of color in America, and there's queer characters in here, and it's great. Like, I think this book is phenomenal. This is a 5-star read for me. Would this make my list of favorite books of the year? I'm not sure I'm gonna sit on it. It's the kind of book that I could see upon a reread ending up being one of my favorite books, but I just think this is excellent. It's definitely literary. If you're looking for something that is escapist or something that's not going to be political, this is not going to be the book for you. And if you're looking for something that's going to be quick and easy to read and not going to require much of you, this is not going to be the book for you. This is something that is going to require time and thought and effort. But again, I think the payoff is really there. So it's one where I don't know that I can say a whole lot more about it, just because I think so much of the experience of this book is getting to the point in part 3 where you do finally start to understand more about the context of how these characters got where they got, how the world became what it is. And not all of your questions are answered. There are things that are kind of vague and you kind of have to guess a little bit, but you do get a lot more information, and it's really interesting. So I kind of loved this, and I will say this, it's set in the not too distant future. It's post-apocalyptic, but like it feels very possible. It feels very relevant to like what is happening in our world now. This doesn't feel like out of left field or like this could never happen. And I think that makes it a little bit terrifying. So again, if you're looking for escapist science fiction, like this is not going to give it to you, but it's really fantastic. It's so well executed. So very glad that I finally was able to read this, and thank you to Tor for sending me a copy. I love it. I'm happy to have it on my shelves, and it's one that I do intend to revisit at some point in the future. Last night, I did also start reading The Bone Orchard. I'm not very far into it yet. I've only read like 28 pages of it, and we'll see. We'll see how this is gonna go. Yeah, I think I had an idea of what this book was going to be or be like, and it's different from what I was expecting. I'll also say, although things seem to be getting a little bit better, but at least at the beginning, the quality of the writing, and I mean, I guess it's hard, right? Because I'm coming off of this where just the prose is so good. And then this is a debut novel, and like the quality of the writing is not at nearly at the same level, which, is fine. But, so I can't tell if it's a contrast thing that is striking me, if it's just because I just read this, I'm reading this and feeling like, oh, okay, like this prose is a little bit lacking, or is it actually the book? I don't know. So I'm gonna keep reading and we'll see where it goes. I'm a little uncomfortable with pieces of the premise, and I'm nervous about how it's gonna handle some things. So I guess some content warnings going into this. So I knew that it was like some kind of a weird thing where it was this woman who runs a pleasure house, and like the women in it are created from this bone orchard. Like you kind of get that vibe from the back, which is true, but it's also weird because it's sort of like she has multiple personalities and she's creating bodies for each of her personalities, which is an interesting choice. I don't know. I don't know how to feel about that, and I don't know where this book is gonna go. It's an odd choice to do it that way. The other thing about it is that one of those bodies, personalities, people, and they feel like people, is like a 14-year-old who is being repeatedly abused by a grown man to the point where she has to go back into this like growth tank to get her body fixed. It's disturbing. And I do not necessarily have a problem with books using or having sexual assaults or even, you know, abuse of children in moderation when it feels called for by the story, like where it feels like it's earned and purposeful in doing something. So far, that is not how this feels to me. So far, it feels more like for shock value, but it's also kind of glossing over it. So I don't know. I have some major qualms about this. I don't know, like, I have a lot of questions about the world building. There's a lot of stuff that's unexplained, and like, maybe it will make more sense as I get further. Maybe I'll get in and I'll feel like, okay, there was really a reason for this. Okay, she really has thought through all of this world building stuff. But as of right now, it feels sort of like, these seem like cool ideas and I'm not going to worry too much about how it actually works, which I can sometimes get on board with if I'm into other parts of it. But yeah, so far, not loving it. But again, I'm only 28 pages in, so I am going to try to read a big chunk of this and then I will touch base again and see how I get on. I will say this, if it gets worse and not better, I'll probably, like books like this, I will give at least 100 pages before I consider possibly DNFing. I mean, I had really high hopes for this, like I hope it gets better. But so far I have questions, so we'll see. Okay, so I've read about another 100 pages and I think I'm gonna keep going. I'm not planning on DNFing it at this point. It is getting more and more intriguing. I still am gonna say I don't particularly love the whole premise of sort of using somebody being like a pedophile as just a stand-in for them being evil, just because I think it lacks nuance in the way that it's done. And I don't feel like, especially given the fact that there's a whole brothel of women, that was a necessary choice to make in this story. So like, I'm gonna have some critiques of it, but I will say I'm getting much more interested in the mystery piece of this, because the whole premise, right, is that at the beginning, the emperor dies, and on his deathbed, he tells Charm, the runner of this brothel, that he knows one of his sons is responsible and he wants her to find out who did it, and he'll free her if that happens. And the sons are mostly pretty awful. So the mystery of who did it is interesting, but even more so the mystery of who is Charm and who are, like, why does she share a brain with different personalities? And I think this book is actually trying to unpack that. I'll also say that the more we get to know about the dynamics of what they call her bone ghosts, because she makes these, like, the girls who work at the brothel, she calls them her bone ghosts, I think they're being separated out as a way of her dealing with trauma. That's kind of what it seems like, because I think her, as she originally was an empath who was losing her ability to cope with reality until she had this like mind lock installed. And I think that part of how she's coping is by separating out different parts of her personality and different parts of her emotions, which is why the main character's name is Charm, and then the other girls are named like Pride, Pain, Shame, Desire, and etc. So I think that's what's going on here. Anyway, it's really interesting. So I don't necessarily love the writing all the time, and I don't necessarily love all of the choices that are being made in how some of this is set up, but it is holding my attention. So I'm gonna keep reading. It's about 1 o'clock, and we'll see how I get on with it. Check in later. It is almost 4 o'clock. I have about 150 pages left in the book. and I have not left the house all day because it's been cold and I didn't want to go outside, but I'm thinking it would be nice to get out, so I might go out and get like some tea and sit and read some more. I do think it's looking like I'm definitely going to be able to finish it all today, which is exciting. And I've got to say, I am glad that I didn't end up DNFing this, because it's been interesting, and this is why I usually do try to give books a while before I decide whether to DNF them, especially if they're for a review, because sometimes things can surprise you. It's a really interesting book, and so even though it's got some like difficult things happening, abusive things happening, it doesn't happen on page, it happens off page, but you still like feel the seriousness of it. There's so much political intrigue, twists and turns, secrets, and because of this mind lock thing that can keep people from remembering certain things, like you're slowly learning more and more, and I'm pretty fascinated, to be honest. It's really interesting. I also like how this book is handling this issue of sex workers, and it's particularly interesting because one of the original personality, I think like part of the original personality of this woman, when she like kind of comes to the forefront in the story, is horrified that like someone else in her body is a prostitute, basically, and is very moralizing about it. But you can clearly see from the posture of the author that it's like, look, this is a practical choice and women making the best of the situation that they're in, and also that it's more complicated than what she thinks it is. So I like the way that it's handling that, and it's doing it in this kind of interesting, subtle way. I always get like nervous because sometimes sex work is not handled well in books. I think this does a good job of that. And yeah. I'm quite liking this, which is great because this didn't start off very well, but I'm curious to see how it's going to end. And yeah, I've got about 150 pages left to go. So I'm going to head out to a coffee shop, get some tea, sit and read, and I will check back in with you guys probably once I finish. I finished, and it's like 8:30. I still have time for the rest of the evening. That's very exciting. Wow, that was one of the biggest turnarounds in a book I've had in a while. The fact that I was low-key considering DNFing it in the first 30 pages, and I ended up loving it. This was so good. It did an excellent job of having reasons for why it was doing stuff. I do still kind of wish part of it had been a little bit stronger with the choice to have a teenager as one of the girls at the house. But yeah, I don't want to spoil this, but I really loved it. It is twisty and compelling, and like it is dark. Like there's a lot of content warnings for a variety of things, which I'll put in my Goodreads review, but I ended up really loving it. It was so good. What am I going to rate this? I don't know. I'm going to have to sit on it. I'm going to write a review and think. It's one of these things where I'm like, I could see giving it 4.5 stars, but also it could make my list of favorite books of the year. I ended up really loving it. Like that was such a turnaround. And yeah, like the political stuff was really interesting. Like there's a lot of like court politics, and something I really appreciate about it as well is that one of the big themes is the violence and pressures placed on women, and like women being pushed to be perfect or to be in these specific boxes, or being looked down on for doing what they need to do to survive, or for being sex workers or whatever. And I think this book does such a good job of really poking holes in a lot of that stuff. So yeah, excellent. It was very good, which I'm glad. I didn't really want to end on a sour note, but really pleased with this. I ended up having a great reading experience with all three of these books. They were very different books from each other, but I ended up quite liking all of them. Not all necessarily perfect, but all very, very good. So hopefully this was interesting for you all. I'm pleased that I got through these 3 books that I needed to review right in the nick of time before the end of the month, and I would love to hear from you in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts or feelings on anything I talked about in this video. Let me know if you've read any of these, if you're interested in reading any of them. And for question of the day, okay, I think this is a good one. Tell me about a book where you had a big turnaround, where you started out reading it and you were like not feeling it, but it sucked you in later on and you ended up loving it, because that is definitely what I feel like The Bone Orchard did for me. So let me know about a case when that happened to you in the comments down below. If you guys like this video, it does help if you give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.